been asked to tell you that the Twitter hashtag is education12. So you're all taking a note of that. All right. The next speaker is Mr. Jørgen Søndergaard. And Jørgen, would you like to join us? He's Managing Director of SFI, the Danish National Centre for Social Research. He holds an MA in Economics from the University of Aarhus. Previously, he was Secretary General to the Commission on Social Security, to the Danish Economic Council, and Assistant and Associate Professor at the Institute of Economics in the University of Aarhus, 1974 to 85. In recent years, Mr. Søndergaard's roles have included Chairman of the Special Task Force on Elementary and Lower Secondary School Quality, Chairman of the Government's Commission on Labour Market Reform, and up to now, Chairman of the Danish National School Council.
Thank you for your kind introduction. I'm really delighted to be here to share with you my view on the current state of the Danish school system and some of the challenges that we are facing. We are still struggling to try to find solutions to some of those challenges, and we haven't quite found out yet. So I'm really here also to listen to all kind of good ideas that and experiences that you may have. Anders Gersen has already outlined some of the basic features of the Nordic school system, so I'll just mention a few facts about the Danish school system. The basic education in Denmark is primary and lower secondary education. It goes from grade 0 to grade 9, and then voluntarily you can also choose to have a grade 10, and about half of the students in fact do so. 80% of the students go to public schools, 20% to private schools. Private schools include, as Anders Gersen mentioned, free schools, but also religious schools and private schools, in particular in the bigger cities. There are a number of different kinds of private schools. And there is a trend that more students attend private schools. It's not a dramatic change, but there is a slight annual increase in the number of students attending private schools. This is particularly a concern in areas where we have many ethnic minority groups living, because we see that the people from the majority population sometimes sort of turn their back to the district school and move their kids to private schools instead. They have the opportunity to choose another public school. There is, in principle, a free choice of public schools, but it's on the condition that there is spare room in the public school. And in those areas where people are most inclined to move their children, there very seldom are this free space. So normally, if you want to move your child out of a public school, very often you have to choose a private school in order to achieve that. Public schools in Denmark are the responsibility of local governments. So they are owned and run by local governments. And we don't have a national curriculum. We have some common goals for the different disciplines, and there are some common rules about how many hours of instructions students as a minimum must have in the Danish language and maths and so on. But at the bottom line is that we have a very high degree of autonomy for teachers and head teachers in the school system. And we also have a strong teachers' union. Almost all teachers in Denmark are member of the one teacher union, and of course they have also a dominant influence on the school system. Please keep these few figures in your mind when I'm coming to the challenge in a moment. So I think the first challenge is that although that we have had as a goal for different governments of different compositions for almost 20 years, a goal that 95% of all students should complete upper secondary education. Not much has happened. Although 95% actually enter upper secondary education, less than 80% complete. Depend on how you measure it exactly, but it's more accurate to say that 75% complete an upper secondary education. Dropout rates are quite high. They're particularly high from the vocational part of the secondary education system. Dropout rates are around 50%. They are higher for boys than for girls, so you can imagine very high dropout rates for boys. Fortunately, some of them then make a second choice or a third choice, and sometimes they succeed in completing a secondary education. But even if we take that into account, we have definitely disturbingly high dropout rates in upper secondary education. There could be many reasons for that. I'm not going through all of them, but one of the reasons is, of course, the structure of the vocational education system. That's a very difficult area to make reforms, because the labor market parties, trade unions, employers' organization, they have a lot to say about the structure of the vocational education system. So it's very hard to make reforms in that particular part of the education system. It probably tend to be more conservative than other parts of the education system. But another important reason is that we have a large group with poor achievement in the basic education system. We have like 20-25% that does not have sufficient reading and math skills for most of the upper secondary studies. They can choose a few, but I mean, if this is not their preference, then they're really having hard times completing an upper secondary education. So this is, of course, an important part. I'll come back to this in a minute, but just before sort of continuing with some of the challenges and the difficulties, there are also some good things to be said about the school system. One of them is that we are particularly successful when it comes to knowledge about society, to the understanding of democracy, and also to practicing democracy. Indeed, there has been one international comparison of that. Danish students do very well in that international comparison. That has to do, I think, with some of the values and the culture of the education system that has been developed in Scandinavian countries. Students are much more engaged in debates and decision-making in Danish schools than what you find in many other parts of the world. And I think this is part of this sort of being brought up to understand in a very concrete way what democracy is about, that you cannot always have it the way that you want yourself. You have to find the compromise. This is part of going to school in the Danish system, that you learn how to argue your case and to find a compromise and accept that now a decision has been taken. I think this is a very important thing. We are particularly pleased that this is also holds true for the large group of ethnic minority children going to school in Denmark. We have right now around 11% of students in basic education in Denmark have an ethnic minority background from third world countries. And in some schools, this percentage is really, really high. In some of the suburban areas around Copenhagen, it's like 50% of all students coming with an ethnic minority background. But they also do very well when it comes to this understanding of society and democracy. So just so that you don't get the impression that everything is sort of being deprived in the Danish school system. But of course, reading and math skills are important. And for us, the challenge is really how we could raise the quality of the school system. And it's not so much a quantitative challenge that we are facing, but we think that we have a challenge with the quality. And it's particularly worrying that social background is still so powerful. Even if we have a school system where parents pay nothing, even when you send your children to a private school, you pay like maybe 3, 4 or 5% of the total cost. The rest is paid for by the government. And all other parts of the education system is free of charge. There are no tuition fees in the Danish education system at all. And students in a further education, they get a public grant as long as they are doing their study. So all sort of the economic barriers that prevent people from completing education have, to a very large extent, been removed. The social background is a very important factor when we look at who get the high achievement, who get the low achievement in the school system. And it's more important in Denmark than even in the other Nordic countries. And of course, this is a disturbing fact that it's probably a good thing to have equality in terms of having no cost to parents, but it's definitely not sufficient to achieve real equality in opportunity in the education system. I think that we also have in Denmark sometimes a debate, is it really important to stick to this goal of having 95% of students completing a higher secondary education? And of course you can find examples of people that are doing quite well without having any upper secondary education. But on the other hand, I think it's very clear that for many people it's really fundamental to have this further education in order to have opportunities in life that is in line with what everybody else gets. And as the two Harvard professors, Claudia Golden and Larry Katz, make the argument, I think very convincingly, in their book called The Race Between Education and Technology. The basic point is that if technology wins that race, if the education system cannot keep pace with the technological development, then it hurt not only the wealth of the nation, but also the equality of the nation. And they very forcefully argue that the rising inequality in the United States over the last 3 decades can be attributed to the fact that the American education system has been falling apart, has not been able to keep pace with what has been going on technology-wise over that period. I believe that the acceptance of the diagnosis that I have just mentioned about the Danish school system is increasing. So nowadays, most will agree that we need to do something to improve the quality of the school system. The problem is, of course, what to do about it. In particular, when you have a school system which is so decentralized, where you have this very high degree of autonomy at the school level. What kind of instruments do you have if you are in the minister's seat? What can you do that would really change the learning of students in the schools? And I wish I had a good answer to that. We are still sort of looking at it. In our system, we have put a lot of resources in the past in the school system. So we definitely spend more money on our schools than you do here in Ireland. And we don't think that the answer now is just to put more resources, more money into the school system. The sort of what we get back from putting in extra money seems to be very little. So this is, I think, a negative lesson. It's not a question about money. We also know that teacher skills are important, and this is really something that is very hard to change. But we have observed over the last 2-3 decades a decline in the prestige of the teacher profession, a very dramatic decline, so that it's not really prestigious to choose to enter a teacher education anymore. And that means that very few of the most able young people actually want to become a teacher. This is a hard one to tackle, because what can one do about it when you are down there? I don't know, I very much envy the Finnish, and they have to protect that very particular situation that you have, that you can attract very good people to teacher education. But for us who have sort of lost that, the real challenge is what can one do to try to rebuild the acceptance in society that the teacher profession is a very important profession. Sure. And one first step in that direction was a reform of the Danish teacher education that was agreed in Parliament last year, try to raise the requirements for becoming a teacher, to raise the quality of the teacher training, but you have to do that in a cautious way, unless you will you risk that you get too few teachers in the future. So, but this is a process that we have started, and I think we'll continue to try to see if we can raise the level of ambition in teacher training. And with inspiration in particular from Ontario, Canada, we try for the whole school system to engage in a partnership model in order to see if we can reach agreement among teacher union, the local governments, and the government and the parliament to try to raise the bar, so to speak, to have a higher ambition, probably mainly in reading and maths in primary schools, and try to do that over an extended period of time, like the next 5 to 10 years, and set up very specific goals that will include both the aggregate level, but also will include that the importance of social background should be declined, so that we get, in that sense, hopefully, a less inequality and less intergenerational dependent inequality. But so far the outcome is uncertain. We are still struggling to see if this is a way forward. Thank you for your attention.